Cliff Young has an answer, at least with regard to the American people. He is, of course, the head of U.S. Public Affairs at Ipsos, and with us here at the table. Cliff, it's great to see you. Happy New Year in advance.
And to you as well.
Hope you had a great Christmas. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
This is interesting. Priorities for Donald Trump in the first 100 days. The biggest priority for everybody, we've learned, is inflation. But after that, it's pretty clear what voters want with regard to sequencing, and it's the border, right?
Yeah, it's immigration, especially among the Republican base and especially among the MAGA base. That is their critical issue. Now, based upon history, based upon the empirical record, new administrations have between 100 days and 6 months to get their agenda through. So I would expect the Trump administration to push forward as fast as possible policies related to immigration.
Okay. Does anything in this debate lead us to believe that it might turn out in policy? We spent all last year talking about border security. The deal that was hammered out, the Langford deal in the Senate, was about border security. Nobody talked about immigration or dreamers. Now we're talking about all of it on the eve of this Congress opening.
True, and the immigration issue is a fraud issue. It's complex and nuanced, and public opinion's nuanced on it. The vast majority of Americans are in favor of immigration, something like 70 to 75%. However, that's legal immigration.
Yeah.
Right? And so the border issue becomes very important. Border policies become very important. They suggest a way forward when it comes to illegal immigration, a way to stop it. And I believe the Trump administration will have to have some sort of initiative or a series of initiatives relative to that if they're going to speak to their base.
Talk to me about what else is on this list, because the question that we've been facing is, when it comes to sequencing, you do the border first, you do Trump tax cuts. Taxes are way down the list here at 9%. What do you make of that?
They're abstract for people now.
Is that it?
The taxes haven't been part of the debate for a while now, right? You can think of the 80s and the 90s when we all talked about middle-class tax cuts. They haven't been. Really, it's about cost of living. That's why Trump won. He rode that wave in. He has to do something relative to that. And then it's immigration. He really needs to throw a bone to the base, and I expect him to do that within the first 6 months.
Americans want the next president to restore trust in institutions, you have found. But half are worried. Cliff, about what?
Well, the half that didn't vote for Trump, right? And so we have to understand it's very political in orientation, in perspective. This is a typical data point that we find after every election. The vast majority of Americans want to come back together, want to unify. Whether that happens or not is another question, but that at least is an aspiration at this point.
That's interesting. You talk about the other half, because we keep hearing that there was a mandate. When you think about the sort of the rhetoric that we've heard around this election, following the polling that you conducted over the course of, 2 years leading us to that point, how close to the truth is the analysis?
Somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Isn't the truth always in the middle?
Sure.
So on the one hand, Trump definitely goes in with a mandate. He controls Congress. He obviously is headed to the White House. That's very important. That allows him to push forward an agenda in the short term. That is, once again, in the first half of the first year. That's when most things happen. But his win was minuscule. Nothing more than 1% or 2 at the national level. It's 1.5 now. Nothing more than a point to 2 points in key swing states. So it was close.
Nothing more than a seat in the House of Representatives.
There we go.
Like.
It's
so that's
very,
not
very
really
close.
A mandate, is it?
Well, it depends how you define it. He has control, tenuous control of both the Congress.
Tenuous is an important word.
True, but both of the Senate and the House, and he obviously he has the White House.
Sure,
there's something there, right? He can work with that.
He can get an enormous amount done.
Exactly.
But to think if the wind blows, you don't have a Republican majority in the House could be a problem as we work our way.
No, we're a divided country. We're a 50-50 country. That's where we are today. That's what this election showed, and I think that the point I would want to make is that even though it's 50-50, public opinion is nuanced. Americans are nuanced. Even on immigration, there's a continuum of what Americans think about it. They're not absolutists on everything. They believe immigration on the one hand is super important. They can see the importance of visas like H-1B1, about 50%. But obviously it's divided and polarized by whether you're blue or red.
H-1B's got to be a tough sell, though. This is jargon for a lot of people.
Right now, it's a bit of catnip, negative catnip for the Republican base. But when it goes to the economic issues, when you frame it as such, Americans agree with it. Obviously, I think in the short term, it sort of gunks up the system a bit because they don't have a lot of time to implement ultimately their agenda. It's more of a distraction than anything else.
How about when it comes to mass deportation? You ran numbers on this, and even Donald Trump himself has indicated, as he did in an interview on NBC following the election, he's kind of worried about the way the optics might look here when the raids begin, assuming that's how this is going to work. What do Americans think about this before it happens?
It's very abstract right now. We have to understand that. And so when you ask Americans straight up, more than 50%, about 52, 53, 54, depending on how you ask it, are in favor of mass deportations. But then when you put sort of caveats there, we put conditions there like splitting families or hurting the economy, hurting job generation. That support falls in a general sense. It goes into the 40s and the 30s. Republicans are stalwarts. They support it no matter what happens. But Trump is very right. The optics on this could be very negative. You could imagine crying children being separated from their families.
Right.
This will not play well, especially if you're trying to push through an agenda in the short term. This could once again cause problems in doing that. Actually, at Ipsos, it's one of the ballot questions we're tracking. Do you support or oppose the immigration policies of the Trump administration? We'll be looking at it very closely because it has, I think, little upside and a lot of downside.
Inflation is the biggest concern, the biggest priority for Americans. If the Trump tax cuts, combined with tariffs, assuming all of this happens, create a reflationary scenario, what's that going to mean for approval ratings for the new president?
I would just add in closing up the border, causing a problem on the economic side in terms of labor. That could really undermine his position. Once again, I think the first 100 days I'm looking at, usually in the first 6 months, new administrations have a mandate, have pretty strong approval ratings, but any of these things can undermine it.
Boy, we've got a lot to learn in the new year together. Think of the crazy stuff you're going to be polling in 2025. You're writing these questions already, I'm guessing.
Yeah, we're reflecting already. It's going to be interesting.
A nice reflection over the course of the holidays with Cliff Young. Ipsos, great to see you, and Happy New Year. Come back and see us in 2025.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
As always, another year of great analysis with Cliff Young here on Bloomberg TV and radio.